Hello everyone. Thanks for joining me. Miss Carol here. We're going to just dive right in as we continue our lessons on the Judges. If you remember last week, we already have been through several judges, haven't we? We talked about Othniel, who was Caleb's nephew. He was the first judge. And then we talked about Ehud, who was very brave and killed the king Eglon of Moab, didn't he? And so next came Jephthah, who killed all those Philistines with his ox goad, right? And then we talked about the only woman judge, who was Deborah. And she was very brave too, because she went into battle because Barak wouldn't go alone, would he? He wouldn't go without her. All right, so now let's just find out what happened after they fought that battle. And in Judges chapter 5, it says, "Then the land had peace again for 40 years. So after Deborah and Barak fought the battle, they had peace in the land for 40 years. And then Deborah died. And then I wonder what's going to happen next. Well, let's read again in Judges chapter 6. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters or tents for themselves in mountain clefts and caves and strongholds where they hid. And whenever the Israelites tried to plant their crops, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and other eastern peoples came into their country and invaded it. They camped on the land and they ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and they did not spare a living thing. For Israel, they didn't leave behind any sheep. Look what they're doing. They didn't leave behind any sheep or cattle or donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their animals. They invaded the land and they ruined it. Midian caused the Israelite people to become so poor, and they cried out to the Lord for help. I mean, they would plant their crops and they would come and burn them, and anything they had stored in their pots, they would burn that and take that off with them. And so the Israelites just started hiding in caves and wherever they could. It was so terrible. And so when the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of that land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of your oppressors. I drove them out from before you and gave you their land to live in. But I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the people in whose land you are living. But you have not listened to me." Once again, they're worshiping those idols. So one day, the Bible tells us that an angel of the Lord came and sat down where a man named Gideon, who was the son of a man named Joash, and he was taking his wheat and he was threshing it. In other words, he was preparing it so he could turn it into some flour, grind it up. And so he was working on that, but he was doing it in the wine press so he could be hidden, because he knew if the Midianites saw him with any food at all, they would come down and take it away from him. So he was hiding and just doing as much as he could to just have some food. So when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." And Gideon said, "But sir, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the wonders that our father told us about when they said, 'Didn't the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us. He's left us and he's put us into the hand of those Midianites." And the angel of the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in strength, because God is sending you to save Israel out of Midian's hand." And Gideon said, "But Lord, how can I save Israel? My family is the weakest in all of Manasseh, and I'm the least in all of my family." And the Lord said, "I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites as if they were just one man." And Gideon said, "Well, if I found favor in your eyes, well, give me a sign that it's really you talking to me. Please don't go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return." And so Gideon went in and he prepared a young goat, and he made some bread without yeast, and he put the meat in a basket and broth in a pot, and he brought them out and he offered them to the angel under the oak tree. And the angel of God said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock." And he did. And he said, "And pour out the broth." And Gideon did that. And with the tip of his staff that was in his hand, he touched the meat and the unleavened bread. So he had a staff in his hand. And he touched it, and fire rose from the rock, and it burned up the meat and the bread. And then the angel of the Lord disappeared. And when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Oh, I have seen God's angel face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Don't be afraid. You're not going to die." All right. So now Gideon has been chosen, but he's kind of not exactly happy about that, is it? He's not sure that he's really the man for the job. Remember when God chose Moses, and Moses says, "But why me? But I can't talk well, but this and but that," right? So Gideon was kind of the same way, wasn't he? And so that same night, that angel came back and said, "I want you to go, and I want you to destroy the idols that your father has built in the city. The ones to Baal and the ones to Asherah. I want you to tear them all down and build an altar to me, and I want you to sacrifice a bull on that altar." And so Gideon did what the angel said, but because he was afraid of his family and he was afraid of the men of the town, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. So the Bible says that they went in the nighttime and they smashed all of the idols. They smashed them down. And then he built another altar to the Lord and sacrificed a bull on it. But in the morning, when the townspeople woke up, they said, "Who did this?" And when they started investigating, they were told, well, it was Gideon, the son of Joash. And so the men of the town demanded from Joash, "Bring out your son, because he's broken down the Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole." But Joash said to the crowd, "Are you going to defend Baal, an idol? Are you going to defend him? Are you trying to save Baal? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death in the morning. Because if Baal is truly a god, can't he defend himself if someone comes and tears down his altar?" And so all the people decided, all right, we'll listen to Joash. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right about Baal. And so now we find out that all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other eastern people joined forces and crossed over the Jordan. And then God's Spirit came upon Gideon. And he said, "I want you to call from the tribes of Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and Manasseh. And I want you to go, and I want you to fight." And Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have promised, then I need another sign from you. I'm going to put this piece of wool on the floor of my threshing floor. And in the morning, if I wake up and the wool is wet with dew, but the ground all around it is dry, then I will know that you do want me to be the one to save Israel. And so the next morning, Gideon gets up, and the fleece was so wet he wrung out a bowl full of water, of dew water from it, but the ground around it was dry. And then he said, "Can I have one more sign? Just one more sign. Don't be angry with me. But how about tonight? You make the ground all around wet, but the fleece will be dry." And so the next morning, Gideon gets up, and the ground is soaked with dew, and that fleece, that piece of wool, is completely dry. And now he says, "All right, I know that I am the one that's supposed to lead the men into battle." And so in the morning, Gideon gathered together all the men from the tribes, and there were 32,000 of them. And so they went to the valley because they were headed toward where all those Midianites and everyone was camped. And God said, "No, Gideon, here's the problem. You've got 32,000 men. That's too many men. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to ask anybody that's afraid to go into battle, anybody that's trembling, that just is too scared, and you send them home." And he said, "All right, Lord." So he did. He said, "All right, if anybody's afraid to go into battle, now's the time. Go ahead and leave. Go on back home." And you're not going to believe this. Of those 32,000, you know how many left and went home? 22,000 of them. That only leaves him with 10,000 to fight all this huge army. And God says, "All right, Gideon, I'm telling you, there's still too many men. Because if you take that many men into battle, then Israel can always say, 'We won the battle because we were so powerful, because there were so many of us and we were so strong.'" And he said, "I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to win the battle because of me, not because you're powerful. Because I am powerful, that's why you'll win. So I want you to take them down to the river. Take your men down to the river and ask them to get a drink of water." And so, okay. So he takes his men down to the river and he tells them to get a drink of water. And God says, here's the thing. Everybody that gets down on their knees and lays down and laps up that water from the river like a dog would, laying down and lapping it up, I want you to send them home. But if the men are down there and they're scooping up the water with their hands and then they're drinking it, I want you to keep them. Now that's a strange thing, isn't it, to ask? So what would make that difference? And there's a lot of different opinions about why God did this, but here's one of them that I kind of think may be the one. If you're a soldier and you're going into battle and your enemy is all around you and you're laying down on the ground getting a drink of water, what could your enemy do? Couldn't they just come up behind you and kill you? Because you wouldn't see them coming, would you? You'd be laying on the ground with your face into the water. But what if you went to the water and you scooped up the water, cupped it in your hand while you were drinking it? You could be turning your head all around, couldn't you? And looking to make sure no one was coming. So of those men that cupped the water in their hands and were able to look around for the enemy, there were 300. And all the rest of them got down and lapped like a dog. And so God told Gideon, send all the rest of those men home and just keep the 300. 300 men against all of these Midianites and all these other people. How are they going to make that work? That's a little bit scary, isn't it? All right, now we're going to start reading from chapter 7, and we're going to start in verse 8. Now the camp of Midian lay below Gideon and his men in the valley. And during the night, the Lord said to Gideon, get up and go down against the camp, because I'm going to give it into your hands. And if you are afraid to attack them, go down to the camp with your servant and listen to what they are saying. And afterwards, you're going to be encouraged to go ahead and attack the camp. You're going to know you're going to win. So the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the other eastern peoples had settled in the valley. And it was thick as locusts with all of them. Their camels could no more be counted than you could count the sand on the seashore. That must have been scary to look down and see there were that many enemies down there ready to fight you. So Gideon and his servant got there just as a man was telling a friend a dream he had had. And he said, I had a dream, and a round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, and it struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. And the man's friend said, well, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has truly given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. And when Gideon heard the dream and the interpretation of the dream, he worshiped God. And he returned to the camp of Israel and called out, Get up! The Lord has given the Midianites into our hands. So he divided the men up into groups of 300. There were 300. He divided them up into 3 groups, 100 each. And he gave each of them a clay pot and a torch. That's a torch right there. And he gave them each a trumpet. Now, I don't know about you, but that's 3 very strange things to take into battle with you, isn't it? Would you choose a clay pot, a trumpet, and a torch to take into battle with you? No, I'd try to have something a little more important than that. But that's what he did. That's what God wants him to do. And so Gideon and the men with him reached the edge of the camp, and they surrounded the camp. And just around 10 o'clock, after the first watchman had gone and the second watchman had come back, they blew their trumpets, and they broke the jars that were in their hands. And they smashed those jars, and they grabbed their torches in their left hands, and they held on to those trumpets in their right hands. Look at that. And so, while each man blew the trumpet, then they shouted, A sword for the Lord, and a sword for Gideon. And while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. Now, can you imagine? They're surrounded on the hills, and they wake up to hearing this loud smashing sound. That was the clay pots. And then they hear this trumpets blowing, 300 trumpets. And then they look up, and there's fire all around the camp. And they thought, oh no, a huge army has come to fight us. And so, when the 300 trumpets sounding, the Lord caused the men throughout that whole camp of the enemies to turn on each other and start killing each other with their swords. They thought the enemy was right there among them, and instead they were killing each other. And then, once they started running away, those that were left, Gideon sent messengers throughout the hill country of Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites and help us fight the battle. So the Ephraimites and the Gideonites, and all came to help them. And so they killed all of the soldiers that day. They killed all of that army that day. Can you imagine? About 135,000 of their enemy they were able to kill that day. But of course the Lord did that, didn't he? It wasn't really anything they did. It was all for the Lord, right? The Lord did it all for them. That's right. Okay, well, next week we're going to talk about another judge. But I hope you're practicing this song. Remember, if you sing it, you'll never forget it. So how about we sing it one more time here? And then you keep practicing it at home. God set judges over Israel, 1 brave woman, 14 men. They helped Israel fight their battles, led them back to God from sin. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. All right, we know about Othniel and Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, and Gideon. And so, if you look at that list, you might be able to figure out who's another famous man from the Old Testament. And we're going to talk about him next week. And I might give you a little hint. It starts with an S, okay? So we'll be learning about him next week. I have some sheets for you so you can print them off. Look under the email the church will send, and there's a picture for you to color of Gideon and them blowing their trumpets and holding up their torches. And this is another word search for you, okay? All right, so I hope you have a great week this week. And I hope you have a fun Halloween, but be safe. Maybe you can have a party at home and just with your family. But anyway, whatever you do, be safe. We love you and we miss you. Bye-bye.